If it's Tuesday, probes, polls, and 2024 brand new numbers from our NBC News poll show just how uncomfortable voters are with the prospect of a Biden-Trump rematch in 2024, as both men face new legal and political headwinds. Plus, new fallout in Memphis, where officials have suspended a 7th police officer and fired 3 emergency responders for their roles in the death of Tyre Nichols. And the White House announces plans to end the nation's COVID health emergency, marking a major shift in pandemic response, even as the death toll from the virus continues to climb. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington. We begin today with a series of problematic developments legally and politically for the leaders of both major parties, President Biden and former President Trump. Brand new NBC News polling released right now shows that voters in America have very little enthusiasm for either to run in 2024. Just 7% of voters say they're enthusiastic about a potential Biden 2024 candidacy, and nearly half say they are very uncomfortable with the prospect. Just 15% say they're enthusiastic about Mr. Trump's 2024 candidacy. More than half say they are very uncomfortable. So in total, roughly 2/3 of voters say they have some reservations or are very uncomfortable with either Trump or Biden seeking another term. Now, this comes amid a day of news showcasing the stark challenges facing both. For former President Trump, more reminders of the web of legal issues surrounding him, as sources confirmed to NBC News that Manhattan prosecutors have convened a grand jury to potentially seek criminal charges for Mr. Trump's role in hush money payments made to an adult film actress in 2016. Additionally, the New York Attorney General today released a video of its deposition of Mr. Trump in its probe into business practices at the Trump Organization. And new reporting from NBC News reveals that Mr. Trump's campaign operation is struggling to raise money. The former president hit the trail this past weekend with a pitch to supporters that seemed quite similar to his 2020 campaign. Take a listen.
Everyone in this room shares the one key mission. We're going to defeat Joe Biden, and the radical Democrats. These are radical left people. I think in many cases they're Marxists and communists.
And today, the Biden White House is facing new questions about the timeline of classified documents found at Mr. Biden's home and office, which are the subject of their own criminal investigation. 2 senior law enforcement officials have confirmed to NBC News the FBI searched the Penn Biden Center offices in mid-November after the president's personal attorneys found classified documents there earlier in the month. Despite many opportunities to do so, Biden officials did not publicly disclose that FBI search. Meanwhile, the president is preparing for a high-stakes meeting with Speaker Kevin McCarthy tomorrow ahead of his State of the Union address next week. All of it amid stagnant and sluggish approval numbers. The president has spent the week so far leaning into one of his own 2020 messages, bipartisanship. Here's what he had to say earlier in New York City while touting a new infrastructure project.
Americans see these projects popping up across the country, and it sends an important message that we're going to, when we work together, like we did in the bipartisan law and the CHIPS law, there's nothing we can't do. Nothing.
Joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli and NBC News senior national politics reporter Jonathan Allen. Thanks to both of you for being here. So, Mike, we've got this breaking news about the FBI and the documents at the Penn Center. As you know, as we've been reporting on throughout the day, he wanted the message of the day to be about bipartisanship, to be about his infrastructure bill. This is Infrastructure Week, after all. And yet we're getting these tough polling numbers as well in 2024. What are you hearing from your sources inside the White House about all of this?
Well, Kristen, wow, those poll numbers really do show a country that is extremely dissatisfied with the current state of the nation. They think it's on the wrong track, and they're extremely uncomfortable with the 2 choices, the 2 leading choices they have to lead the country into the future. Now, you got a real sense from President Biden today here in New York of the tone he wants to set for the year ahead, leading up to his State of the Union address and ultimately his reelection campaign, talking about promises delivered, talking about the ability ability to get an economy that works for the middle class, to really tout billions and billions of dollars that are going to lead to tens and thousands of new jobs for Americans. That's really what he wants to be talking about. But this White House continues to face challenges on multiple fronts. The biggest challenge of late, of course, has been this classified document investigation, and the White House really struggling against this drip of new revelations, now learning that just like his home in Wilmington, Delaware, the office he used at the Penn Biden Center was searched by the FBI. Why wasn't the White House more forthright about this? That's a big question. There's also the challenge of the unknown, this tragic case of Tyre Nichols, forcing the White House to be nimble. The White House announcing a meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus on Thursday at the White House. We also just learned that the Vice President, Kamala Harris, is a late addition to the funeral in Memphis tomorrow. An interesting move by the White House to send her there. But then ultimately you have the biggest challenge ahead for the White House this year is with this new Republican Congress. You got a real sense, Kristen, yourself, with that great exchange you have with the president about what his message is to the new Republican speaker. He's challenging him to show me your budget. He knows the divisions in the Republican Party. And we got even more candid sense of the president's thinking ahead of this meeting when he was just in the last hour speaking to donors here in New York. He talked about the off-the-wall promises that Kevin McCarthy had to make with his caucus to be elected speaker. He said one of the goals for him in about to head to make the case to voters is to show that we won't tolerate MAGA Republicans. That's a real sense of how the president views his mission as he potentially seeks a second term now.
And a lot of reporting on the timing of when a potential announcement might come. Of course, you reported first, Mike, that it will come sometime after the State of the Union, if in fact he does officially decide to declare. Let me just ask you very quickly before I let you go about that high-stakes meeting with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. A lot is on the line, Mike. And again, as you noted, the president just indicated today when I asked him if he would negotiate that he's not moving off of his perspective that he's not going to negotiate, and yet Speaker McCarthy saying, we want to cut spending.
Yeah, Kristen, the White House clearly thinks that they have the political upper hand here. The president has been making this case, not just of late. He was doing it all across the country ahead of the midterm elections, that Republicans are proposing very unpopular things like spending cuts to Social Security, to Medicare, to defense spending, that are going to divide the Republican Party, let alone divide the country. But it's one thing, Kristen, to have the political upper hand to win a fight on a campaign setting. But this fight over the debt ceiling has real stakes for the economy, not just here, but globally. A default on the U.S. debt obligations would be historic. It would be extremely detrimental to the global economy, and it would really hurt the situation the president wants to be making a strong case about the economy on in 2024.
Yeah, and of course, the nation has never defaulted, so the stakes could not be higher. Jonathan, let me turn to you. Of course, former President Trump back on the campaign trail over the weekend, and you've got some new reporting on some of the struggles that he's having fundraising. What are your sources telling you?
Yeah, Kristen, President Trump in his launch has had difficulty, a big lull after the announcement without the big campaign rallies we'd expected. As you noted, he got out on the campaign trail just on Saturday to New Hampshire and South Carolina, early primary states. But the big news here is he raised $9.5 million in the last 6 weeks of last year. That was the 6-week period from the time he announced through the end of December. He raised $11.8 million in the first 6 weeks of that fundraising quarter. So $11.8 million in the 6 weeks before he announced, 9.5 afterward. There are signs that he understands that his fundraising is in danger, that he's in danger of a really big cash crunch pretty quickly. He has already hired a new firm, an additional firm, to do digital fundraising for him, to contact those small dollar donors that have been so essential to his past political success. And we're also likely to see him build a more traditional fundraising structure with big dollar donors and the kind of bundlers that you typically see on presidential campaigns.
Well, and part of his goal with announcing so early was to try to clear the field, at least to some extent. Is there a sense inside Trump world that that's happened? Because if you look at things, it seems like things are actually heating up between him and Governor DeSantis. What are you hearing?
Yeah, there's no sense that he's been able to clear the field. DeSantis is obviously making a lot of noise like he's going to run. He's not the only one. Mike Pence, the former vice president, Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State, Senator Tim Scott, of South Carolina. Looks like he may be a presidential candidate. Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina and U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. So there's any number of candidates that will run. And the reason that that's so important, Kristen, to the point that you made at the very top of this, where basically most of the people in the country don't want to see Biden run and don't want to see Trump run. Biden doesn't have any opponents right now and may not get them, and certainly is rejiggering the Democratic primary system in order to make it harder for someone to run against him. And then on the Republican side, if there's a whole mess of non-Trump candidates, the fact that Donald Trump retains, a base that is maybe 30% of the Republican Party, that's like a very, very firm base, maybe a little bit bigger, particularly if he starts running against other people, he's in a good position. I would say that he is the weakest that we have seen him and still the strongest candidate in the Republican field right now.
It's a great way to sum it up, and we are about to delve into those numbers. Great reporting, Mike and John. Thanks so much. Joining me now on set is Stephanie Shriak, Senior Advisor for the Strategic Victory Fund and former president of Emily's List. Mark Murray, Senior Politics Editor here at NBC News. Eugene Daniels, White House Correspondent for Politico and an NBC News political analyst. And Danielle Pletka, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and also an NBC News contributor. Thank you all for being here on a very busy Tuesday. Mark, I have to start with you and these numbers. Let's put some of them up again just to remind folks. Feelings toward a Biden candidacy in 2024, feelings toward Trump candidacy in 2024. Everyone seems to have reservations. Who should be more worried about these figures?
Kristen, first, let me start. Our poll question is a little bit different than others, where usually you end up looking at what the horse race is. And our pollsters at this stage of the contest, and it's still really, really early, want to look at the different levels of support or opposition you might end up having. And so let's focus on the polar extremes for both President Biden and Donald Trump. And for President Biden, you end up having just 7% say that they are very enthusiastic. Of course, that's something we saw for him in 2020. It worked out pretty well for him. But on the other side, you end up having 48% who say they're very uncomfortable. A lot of this coming from Republicans and also independents. But then let's look at former President Donald Trump. You have more who are enthusiastic, 15%. Again, kind of on brand with him. And John was just talking about that base of support. But then you even have more opposition, 52%, who say they are very uncomfortable. And when you end up looking at both men side by side, they're almost kind of mirror images of each other. You have 1/3 of the general electorate saying, yes, I'm either enthusiastic or comfortable. And then 2/3 saying, no, I either have reservations or am very uncomfortable. And so there is this kind of, at this very early stage of the 2024 race, some very fear and loathing of are we going to have a rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump?
Danielle Pletka, when you look at these numbers, I mean, what occurs to it seems like we could be heading for deja vu all over again.
Oh, my God, please.
I'm sorry for saying it.
No, you know what struck me? You asked that question, right? Who's the big loser here? And the answer is we're the big losers here because can't we do better than two candidates that nobody wants to see in the race again? Can't we do better in 2024 than we did in 2020, 2016? We really need fresh blood on the political front, Democrats and Republicans.
Let's look at another number. Right track, wrong track. 71% of the country, Stephanie, says the country's on the wrong track. That's a huge number. Mark will put it in historical context, but when you see that, I mean, what's your big takeaway to Danny's point?
Well, we're in an interesting time because you've got Donald Trump who's entering what will be a very messy primary that he's going to have to fight, and he's going to get beaten up, and he's going to beat people up, and we know he's really good at that. And President Biden is going to spend the next 18 months delivering infrastructure like he did in Baltimore today, going state by state and showing the people what he has delivered in the last 2 years with the Democratic Congress, which, frankly, is near historic amounts of achievements that the American people don't quite know yet. But it's money that's going to go to the American people, and it's going to produce jobs, and that's going to make a huge difference. But they're now on the salesmanship plane, and that's what we're going to see over the next year.
Eugene, what do you make of these numbers and of that idea that you do have both parties saying, we want fresh blood, but we kind of feel stuck.
Yeah. Well, the part of it is these two men who feel like they do want to take each other on again, right? You have Joe Biden, who is looking at Donald Trump running and is saying, I'm the only one that can beat him. He has proven to be correct in that assessment, and he thinks he can do it again. I think at one point he said, I'll beat him like a drum. And that is something that this White House continues to feel. But when you talk to Democrats and Republicans and then to regular voters, they're all kind of over it. These men are not just old, which is a lot of what we hear from voters. They're ideologically different than a lot of the Americans in this country. And so for Donald Trump, he has all of his baggage. And then for Biden, when you talk to younger voters, black voters, other marginalized groups, they want to see a more left-leaning candidate and someone who isn't, again, an old white man.
And one of the notable things that came from this poll, Mark Murray, is that you have this issue of classified documents, where you have 67% saying that President Trump's handling of them is concerning, 67% saying that President Biden's handling of them is concerning. Now, there are differences. President Biden turned them over. The White House itself has not been very transparent with the public in terms of, getting ahead of these disclosures that have broken in the press. Former President Trump, of course, refused to turn over the documents. That's why he got the subpoena. But what does that tell you? That the public does not see a difference.
Well, and it's important to note how we ask that question. It's just about the classified documents that were found in either your former office or residence. Do you find that concerning or not? And yes, we found mirror images saying 67%. Yes, I find that concerning. And interestingly, in our poll, you ended up having majorities of Democrats saying, yes, the Biden documents were concerning, and a majority of Republicans saying, yes, the Trump documents were concerning. So some of the partisans saying, I got problems with my guy, and now they're handling classified information. But Kristen, I do think, as you mentioned, the handling is important to note here, too. CBS had their own poll, had a slightly different result. They asked, what are your perceptions of the handling after the effect? And the poll found that President Biden, people having more confidence in how he's handled things than former President Donald Trump. So how we ask those questions are very interesting. But again, on the surface, just like our earlier one, are you enthusiastic or are you very uncomfortable? And these classified documents, there's starting to be some polar extremes and also some mirror images that we're seeing in these
Mark,
numbers.
I think there's one other question that needs to be asked here about the documents. As we now know, Vice President Pence had some in his house. I'm actually afraid they all have some at their house. Literally, everybody's looking right now. Literally, senators on intelligence committees are looking. House members are. Everybody's looking right now. The government needs to figure out what to do. There's an issue here. I think the next question to the American people is, how much do I care?
Right.
I may be concerned because I sound like that should be concerning, I guess, but does it affect my life today?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm much more concerned about prices and jobs and childcare and education. And so I worry that we just keep on talking. We were talking about this earlier, not to but we were literally talking about this earlier. Is how much longer as this keeps going, is this what people are really, truly thinking about?
Well, and I think you're right. There's no doubt the economy, inflation, they continue to be the top issue. And yet, Danielle Pleca, is it an area where former President Trump has a potential weakness, vulnerability?
No, I think if you want to tot out President Trump's weaknesses, this is probably not going to be the top one. I can name a few.
Are you bothered by the fact that he's out again comparing the intelligence community, talking about Vladimir Putin, saying he believes Putin over the intelligence community?
Anytime Donald Trump opens his mouth, I worry.
Thank you.
And I'll be honest, and I think a lot of Democrats are concerned when they see the President of the United States open his mouth. They're worried what he's going to say. We are in a difficult spot, but I think Stephanie makes exactly the point that we were talking about right before, which is we're spending an awful lot of time talking about these classified documents. Most people don't have security clearances. Most people are worried about the fact that their eggs are really expensive, that gas is expensive, that crime, immigration, all these things are out of control. Yeah, it's a bad thing that our leaders are hypocrites, that they're irresponsible, but
given that, Eugene, that just sets the stage for this meeting tomorrow between the president and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. And you have both sides that seem to be dug in right now. I mean, how does this logjam get broken? And we all know it won't until the absolute last minute of the last day.
June 4th. Exactly. Exactly. We're not going to see much come out of that meeting. You know, there was a White House memo that came out today from Brian Deese and Shalonda Young, who heads up the OMB, saying basically what the president has been saying for a while. I am not going to negotiate on the debt limit. We can have a conversation about the economy and what kind of spending cuts Republicans want to see and where they want to go. And that is what the White House is going to do tomorrow. And I will say what was really interesting in that memo is that they're kind of painting McCarthy in a corner, saying, you know, all of the other leaders, including Mitch McConnell, are on board with handling this. What is your problem? That's something we're going to see.
This is what, in all the source calls I've made, I cannot figure out who is going to blink. Have you figured it out? Do you think Kevin McCarthy's going to give up his push for spending cuts, or does the president find a way to negotiate?
So there are two pieces here, and that memo that you just referenced is very nicely articulated. I'm not going to negotiate with you about the debt limit. Well, duh. Okay. Nobody's going to negotiate. It's a tool, but what they want to talk about is spending cuts. If they get commitments from the president on spending cuts, if they get commitments from the Democrats on some spending cuts, then of course Kevin McCarthy is going to blink. He's always going to have to. We're not going to default. This is one of those, you know, situations. Yep. But will they get the spending cuts? There, I'm less sure that it's going to be a victory for the White House.
Stephanie, what is your prediction in terms of watching how this is all unfolding and what you're hearing? And what would you advise them to do?
Well, they're going to go in with some definite red lines. Like, they're not going to touch entitlements and Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. I mean, programs that like mean everything to the American people. They're going to stay the line. But if there's a larger conversation about minor cuts on the edges, maybe perhaps we got to save the debt.
Slowing down spending.
Yeah.
We spent trillions.
That's going to be an interesting conversation now.
I cannot end this panel without discussing very quickly George Santos. Mark Murray, he says he's going to recuse himself from serving on committees. How effective can he be if he's not going to serve on committees?
So
what's your take?
I'm going to stick with the poll numbers, Kristen. There was a new Siena College poll that Newsday that came out. 78% of his own congressional district voters want him to resign. That is just a blaring bat signal that you're not in good health. You're not in good standing. I don't know if it's going to be 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, but he is certainly in one of the worst situations any freshman member of Congress has been in.
I'm glad you cite that poll. It's actually a really important one. Eugene, final word to you. What was your take when you saw this? Can a freshman member of Congress be effective in any way, shape, or form if he's not going to sit on committees?
Well, the question is, what does effective mean in each of these parties now, right? For Republicans, someone like George Santos, he doesn't seem that interested in governing and the actual talking about laws and passing laws. Any conversation with him, that's made clear. Marjorie Taylor Greene also had this situation where she was pulled off of her committees by a vote from the Democrats, and she is kind of one of the right-hand people to Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House. So there's a possibility that they can use this time to kind of build up their own repertoire and people and how much power they have within Congress. But this guy, when you have you have the Nassau GOP saying, we want you gone, 78% of folks saying we want you gone. I think Mark's right. It's right down the line.
This was a great conversation. We could sit here all day, but thank you. Thank you, guys. This was fantastic. Stephanie, Mark, Eugene, and Danny, really appreciate it. Coming up, new developments in the investigation into the death of Tyre Nichols. We are live in Memphis with the very latest there. That's next. Plus, inside the push for police reform, President Biden now has a meeting scheduled with the Congressional Black Caucus, who are calling on him to act. My interview, one-on-one with one of the caucus's leaders ahead. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. Welcome back. 7 Memphis police officers and 3 fire department employees have now been relieved of their duty for their involvement in the January 7th traffic stop and beating that led to Tyre Nichols' death. Of those 7 suspended officers, 5 were charged with second-degree murder last week. Last night, the Memphis Police Department put out a statement confirming that a 6th officer, Preston Hemphill, and a 7th unnamed officer were also taken off the street at the same time. Now, the statement also noted that the investigation is ongoing and the next phase of personnel actions should be taken in the coming days. Memphis residents gathered to hold another vigil last night. And across the country in Sacramento, people gathered at the skate park that Nichols, an avid skater, frequented when he was growing up. Nichols' funeral is scheduled for tomorrow, and as Mike Memley reported at the top of the show, the White House announced this afternoon that the vice president will attend. NBC's Antonia Hilton has the latest from Memphis. I'm also joined by Paul Butler, an NBC News legal analyst and law professor at Georgetown University. Thanks so much to both of you for being here. So, Antonia, bring us up to speed here. What do we know about the latest officers and fire department officials who were relieved of their duty?
Well, Kristen, one officer, their identity still has not been released yet, but the other officer, Preston Hemphill, has been relieved of duty. And anyone who has watched the video or the videos of the beating of Tyre Nichols will recognize Officer Hemphill from video 1. This is the video in which you can see from a white officer's point of view. You can see the officer pointing a taser at Tyre, and then later you can hear Officer Hemphill recommending that his colleagues chase him down and stomp Tyre Nichols. And so for days now, even before his name had become public and confirmed, residents, activists here had been asking for him to not just be held accountable, not just to lose his job, but to face charges. And as you mentioned, the DA has left the door open to the possibility of additional charges to the 5 officers who are already facing very severe criminal charges, but also to other people involved, including these other officers on the scene, and then potentially EMTs or other employees involved in the police report that night. Those 3 members of the fire department that you mentioned, too, 2 of them are EMTs who you can see in the video at points taking a very long, agonizingly long time to actually render any kind of medical aid to Tyre Nichols. And the 3rd is a lieutenant. And as I've spoken to community members here, it's this kind of new information, this kind of new action that they've been looking for. And so while they're heartened by all of this, they say that it's also added to a sense, a sort of gnawing sense for them that there's more here, that there may be additional people who knew what was happening to Tyre Nichols that night, additional information about how that stop even began in the first place, since we at no point in the video records see any crime committed by Tyre Nichols. They feel like this is still just the beginning, and they want other employees, other people who may have been involved that night to be charged, Kristen.
And Antonia, before I let you go, the funeral is going to be tomorrow, as we just said. The vice president will be there. Obviously, the community bracing for a very devastating day. What are you expecting from tomorrow?
It's going to be heavy. I can tell you the church behind me here, where it will be hosted, the Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church, expects that this place, this parking lot, this entire area is going to be absolutely overflowing with people from the community and even people from outside of the community coming here to celebrate Tyre Nichols' life. That includes not just Vice President Harris, but also the families of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, who are traveling here to Memphis to grieve alongside Tyre Nichols' parents. And our own colleague, Al Sharpton, is going to give the eulogy, and then the senior pastor of this church, Jason Turner, who I've actually spent a lot of time with over the last several days, is going to lead and officiate the entire process. What I can tell you to expect to hear is a connection between faith and protest, which is something that you hear often in black churches across this country. But the pastor here is very certain that his message is going to really connect Tyre's life and a celebration of that with a call for action and a call to reform, Kristen.
Antonia Hilton, thank you so much for all of your fantastic reporting throughout this just tragic ordeal. We really appreciate it. Paul, let me go to you now, and let's just pick up where Antonia started, which was these officers who were relieved. We know Preston Hemphill, as she laid out, one of the first officers to encounter Tyre Nichols. What do you anticipate happening with them? They've been relieved of their duty, but they haven't been charged yet.
Not yet. We know that the prosecutor was focused on the second encounter that the police had with Mr. Nichols, where they especially viciously beat him. But remember that first encounter, we don't know why Mr. Nichols was stopped. The police chief said she doesn't see any evidence that he committed a crime, but the officers proceed to yank him out of the car. They cursed at him, and they put a stun gun in his face. Now, That's not legal unless the officers have probable cause to arrest and reason to use that kind of force. Since there's no evidence that they had that legal evidence, I think that any charge from negligent homicide to aiding and abetting is on the table for some of these other officers who haven't yet been charged.
And you've heard some frustration expressed by some community members, the fact that the black police officers were charged so quickly. And of course, before the video was released, here you have an officer who is Caucasian. And of course, we don't know the identity of the other officer, the 7th officer, but who has not yet been charged. What do you make of that, and how might that impact the community at a moment like this when emotions and tensions are already running so high?
So we know that black people are treated differently than white people in every stage of the criminal legal process. So it's not weird to think that these black officers would be charged when a white officer wasn't charged yet. That's just an artifact of our criminal legal system. And I think it's in part why so many people have been especially upset that these officers were African American, the first 5 who were charged, because if they weren't wearing their badges and uniforms on that night as young black men, they could have met the same fate as Mr. Nichols.
Do you expect that they will face more charges, more serious charges than they're already facing, the 5 police officers who've already been charged?
So they've been charged with second-degree murder. The only more serious charge would be first-degree murder, which requires evidence of premeditation. And I don't think that the prosecution has that evidence. So I think that these are very serious charges. I think that the prosecution with the second-degree charge might be open to a plea bargain, which is the way that most criminal prosecutions are resolved, with the defendant saying that he's guilty in exchange for what he hopes will be a lower sentence. So I think the issue will be how much time the prosecutor is willing to give up to allow a sure conviction, which is why prosecutors enter into plea bargains, and also what the community would accept. Would it be okay with a resolution with these officers pleading guilty to manslaughter? Would the community be okay with these officers agreeing to a resolution that doesn't include prison time? I think those are all open questions.
And Paul, can I just end by getting your thoughts on police reform? This is not a new conversation. We know that the Memphis Police Department has disbanded the Scorpion unit. We know that other police departments all across the country are looking at taking similar actions. There's now a conversation in Washington again about what can be done at the federal level. But why is the country failing to address this?
You know, was it Fannie Lou Hamer, the Mississippi activist during the 1960s, who said that she was sick and tired of being sick and tired? I think that's where a lot of us are now. President Biden called this case a test of whether we're the country we say we are. At this moment, we're the country where an American citizen guilty of no more than a traffic violation was tortured and killed on public streets by agents of the government. So I think the problem is way bigger than bad apple cops, and it's too big to be resolved by reform. We have to think very ambitiously, very innovatively about how we use our American ingenuity, our black genius, our Hispanic excellence to transform public safety into a system that all citizens can have confidence in.
Paul, thank you so much. We will leave it there. We really appreciate your thoughts and insights. Appreciate it. And coming up next, my one-on-one interview with the vice chair of the Congressional Black Caucus as she prepares to meet with President Biden on police reform. Congresswoman Yvette Clarke joins me next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Following the release of body cam video of the brutal assault of Tyre Nichols, the Congressional Black Caucus requested a meeting with President Biden to discuss national reforms to the justice system. The White House today says President Biden has accepted the request and will meet with the group on Thursday. The meeting comes as Congress remains stalled on even beginning a new round of negotiations on police reform. One of the major sticking points continues to be qualified immunity, which gives officers protection from civil liability. Well, today, Republican House Majority Leader Steve Scalise said that he is, quote, strongly against getting rid of qualified immunity. Take a listen. Joining me now is Congresswoman Yvette Clarke of New York. She is also vice chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and will be attending Thursday's meeting at the White House. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Really appreciate it.
Great to be with you. I'm sad it's under these circumstances, Kristen.
I am too, Congresswoman. And let's start right there. You will be at that critical meeting at the White House on Thursday. What will your message be to President Biden?
Our message, members of the Congressional Black Caucus, will be a full court press. Needs to be made. Concerted effort on part of the House, the Senate, and the executive to pass the George Floyd Policing Act. It is imperative that reforms be put into place immediately. There is no longer a time to sit back and sort things through. The danger of rogue cops in communities across this nation is an imminent danger, and we need to address it.
Congresswoman, we have heard the president say what you are saying right now. He wants to see the George Floyd bill get passed. But as you know, right now, there just don't seem to be the votes for that. The House is led by Republicans, who are a number of them saying that change should happen at the state and local level. So how do you get police reform done when you don't have the votes?
We have to continue to keep the pressure on. The people of this nation will ultimately be the arbiters of this issue. We can't allow for it to recede, because in any given moment, we can unfortunately witness this type of authoritative abuse that takes the life of a loved one. And it's happened, throughout the history of this nation and continues to this very day. I think that it is imperative that we continue to keep the pressure on.
Do you think it's realistic that it gets done in this current Congress, given the makeup?
It's so interesting, Kristen. It's that, we have seen circumstances that seemed, far-fetched or highly unlikely move to the center of the agenda and get done. And so I think that we cannot give up hope. We cannot be discouraged in this moment. We have to use every lever at our disposal to impress upon the members of this House, of the Senate, to get the job done.
Do you think that President Biden is doing enough? He's delivering his State of the Union address next week, as you know. Is he using his bully pulpit effectively enough as commander-in-chief?
Well, clearly, there's much more to be done.
So is that a no, Congresswoman?
Order. It's not a no, because he did do an executive order. We have to give credit where credit is due. We are finally making sure that data is kept on officers who've been charged with misconduct. We need to now make sure that that is in full effect. His executive order is doing what it's intended to do, but we need to also encourage him to go even further. We know that he's a master of the negotiation and was able to get so many things passed in the last Congress. And I think that, we have to rely on his ingenuity, his relationships to get us to that point with respect to policing accountability.
Let me drill down on you with what you might actually accept. Is there any room for compromise here? As you know, qualified immunity is one of the big sticking points. That essentially shields officers from civil liability in most cases. Would you support legislation that did not include a qualified immunity clause?
What we're looking for as members of the Congressional Black Caucus is accountability. That is the missing factor in all of these incidents. It's holding the individuals that we give a public trust accountable for their actions. And if that comes in the form of a qualified immunity, I'm all in with that. If it comes in another form, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But at the end of the day, we cannot arrive at this moment once again and not hold those rogue officers that would abuse their authority. We can't afford not to hold them accountable.
Senator Graham has floated something that has gotten attention. It's the idea of keeping qualified immunity in place for individual officers, but making police departments liable. Is that the type of compromise you could get behind?
I would have to look at the details of what Senator Graham is proposing.
Would you be open to it? Are you open to the
possibility
of
it? Police departments are paid by are established through taxpayer dollars in the same way that we pay police officers. And, there's a public trust that goes beyond departments, but to the individual. And so I'd have to, again, take a look at what it is that Senator Graham is proposing. But I will tell you that each and every officer that swears to protect and serve the public must be held accountable.
Congresswoman, let me get to the breaking news of the day. 2 senior law enforcement officials have confirmed to NBC News that the FBI searched the Penn Biden Center back in mid-November after the revelations that there were classified documents found there. Again, the public just learning this today after a news report divulged this information. What is your reaction, and do you think the Biden White House has been transparent enough on this issue?
Well, I think that each day different aspects of what has occurred are unfolding. And I think it's important that, first of all, the Biden administration, President Biden himself, has owned up to cooperating with the FBI and all of the authorities with respect to these documents. At the end of the day, that cooperation is critical to us, learning that we cannot allow for our classified documents to go unaccounted for over a period of time by anyone.
Congresswoman, very quickly, because we're almost out of time, our latest poll shows that 48% say they are very uncomfortable with a 2024 candidacy by President Biden. Are you comfortable with President Biden running again?
I am extremely comfortable. Last Congress was the most productive Congress in a generation. And it's clear to me that he has the ability, the intellect, the energy to continue to move this nation in the right direction. I'm quite comfortable.
Congresswoman Clarke, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Kristen.
After the break, Secretary of State Blinken meets with key leaders in the Middle East and urges calm amid a spike in deadly violence in the region. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is heading back to Washington from the Middle East after a deadly few weeks for both Israelis and Palestinians. Today, Blinken met with the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, in the West Bank, a day after meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. The trip comes less than a week after a Palestinian opened fire at a synagogue in East Jerusalem, killing at least 7 civilians. More than 30 Palestinians have also been killed this month in the West Bank, with most of those deaths coming during Israeli military raids. Joining me now is NBC's Kelly Kobiea in Jerusalem. Kelly, thank you so much for joining me. So what has been the biggest takeaway from Secretary Blinken's trip and his meetings?
Well, I think it's a message that Secretary Blinken has repeated at least 3 times now, that both sides need to take steps to de-escalate the situation, to calm tensions, to bring the temperature down, to try to stop this cycle of violence. He met with President Abbas for 2 hours today, a much longer meeting than we expected, and afterward gave some familiar statements, once again talking about de-escalation speculation, talking about how the U.S. opposes anything that would jeopardize the two-state solution, Palestinian statehood, which is the end goal sometime in the future, although very few steps, very little progress has been made toward that goal. But he said first and foremost, the violence has to stop, and he said both sides came up with good ideas to work toward that. Take a listen to a little bit of what he had to say.
I'm not going to detail the ideas, but I think there are some concrete ideas from both sides that, if pursued, would really help diffuse the current situation. And it's why I asked some of my colleagues to stay behind to support the efforts that both parties are making to try to get to a better path. It is fundamentally up to them.
So after 2 days trying to leave the region on a positive note, but I have to say, Kristen, there is deep skepticism on the ground here that anything will change in the foreseeable future. Kristen.
All right, Kelly Kobiea, thank you so much for reporting on those critical talks for us. We really appreciate it. Still to come, is the COVID emergency over? What you need to know as the White House prepares for a major shift in its pandemic strategy. That's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The World Health Organization says COVID continues to be a global public health emergency. But in the U.S., the government's pandemic emergency will soon be coming to an end. The Biden administration says it will briefly extend the COVID-19 national emergency and the public health emergency until May 11th, at which point it will end both. Now, the announcement came in part as a response to legislation from House Republicans seeking to end those declarations immediately. The White House was arguing it needs time to effectively wind down various emergency programs and prevent, quote, wide-ranging chaos and uncertainty in the healthcare system. Rolling back these emergency declarations, whether it happens in May or sooner, will mark a significant turning point in the federal government's response to the crisis. And we should note, COVID is still causing an average of roughly 400 deaths every single day. Joining me now to discuss this is Dr. Kavita Patel, an NBC News medical contributor and former Obama White House policy director. Dr. Patel, thanks so much for being here. I just want to start with this disparity that we're seeing. Here you have the U.S. prepared to say in May that COVID is no longer a public health emergency, and yet the World Health Organization says, yes, it is. Are there concerns that the U.S. is moving too quickly?
Especially when a country such as ours that has an impact globally has this very public declaration. But I think what listeners should understand and viewers should try to comprehend is they were acting, I think, as you mentioned, to try to offset H.R. 7 or some sort of action that would cut things off precipitously. So the political context is unfortunate because it's probably prompting that end to the declaration earlier than expected.
What is the potential impact of that, not just for the public, but for the various health agencies that are trying to combat COVID?
For agencies, a lot of what happens with the public health emergency is the ability to shunt funds to places like the CDC, to things that can help for the Department of Transportation to stand up protocols. That funding, they'll have to keep going to Congress and look for signals of that. And then to individuals, I think what really will be noticeable is that while we enjoyed free access to tests, to vaccines, to all sorts of things, treatments, that will now get shifted into the private insurance. If you have private insurance or an employer or individual insurance, or through the Medicaid and Medicare programs, subject to copays, subject to some limitations potentially. That, Kristen, makes it even more difficult to navigate when it's already been difficult to navigate.
Well, and Dr. Patel, just to follow up on that point, you already have vaccine hesitancy. What could the impact be on vaccines overall if this is no longer covered by the government?
Yeah, disaster is hesitancy plus confusion, because then you really are dealing with people who even intentionally would like to get treated or tested and can't figure out how to do that. So that's exactly why they need this transition time. I think that having this time extended until May, it is exactly what should be priority one for the entire administration. It should be priority one for Congress, too. How do we have America ready for this point in time? And what can we do to also signal that even though they're declaring an end to the emergency, that does not mean it is any less of a priority than any other global threat that we're talking about. And I think they need to be able to communicate all of those things.
Well, and just to drill down on that point, I mean, what should the White House's message be to try to keep clear lines for people who still have deep concerns about this?
Yeah. Still priority number one, the declaration of
Dr. Patel, we're having a little bit of trouble hearing you. Let me see if you can maybe jigger your mic around, see if that helps a little bit. And there we go. Now we can hear you clearly, because what you're saying is so important. What do you think the White House's messaging should be on this?
The public health emergency has ended by some sort of declaration. That does not mean it is not priority number one for this administration. And then the most important message, that the administration is signaling a safety net, that people, that they're working on a plan to help support those populations.
And in terms of a vaccine timeline and booster shots, is there a way to streamline that so that you are seeing more people get their COVID vaccine, get their booster shot when they need it?
Yeah. Took a first step, Kristen, that was important to say we want to harmonize the vaccine. So we don't want all these different versions of the vaccines out there, that there's really kind of one vaccine available to all. The next step will be to flu vaccine. That will make it easier to doctors like myself when we should give it to patients.
Okay, Dr. Kavita Patel, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Really important information as, again, the White House moves in May to say that COVID is no longer a national health emergency. We appreciate your information and your insights. Thank you, Dr. Patel, for being with us, and thank you for being with us this hour. Chuck is back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.